right, Cleantech world, you know what time it is, you know what day it is. I'm just kidding, this is recorded, so you have no clue. I've got to tell it to you. This is This Week in Cleantech. It's a roundup of this week's biggest stories that you need to know about in climate and clean energy in 15 minutes or less. And today is Friday, April 11th, 2025. It's a great day to buy stock in us. Paul Gerke, Factor Director. I couldn't even give my title right because I was trying to lay the line on that thick, Mike Casey. Paul Gerke, Content Director at Factor This, alongside my foil, Mike Casey of Tigercomm. We're also joined by Akshat Rathi of Bloomberg News. He's on the horn waiting for us patiently to quit with the banter. Mike, how are we doing on this Friday?
And Akshat is a returning guest.
Yes.
He was on the show back in October of 23 talking about his book, which is awesome. Get it if you have not yet. And I want to give a listener shout out to Adam Gerke. He just DM'd me last night saying, I discovered the Factor This podcast recently, and I'm enjoying it. So, Paul, please don't talk Adam out of that with your regular behavior. Let's be on our best.
Adam, don't get too overzealous about going back into the archives, because once you acquire a taste for us, there's no going back. We want to shout out all the listeners that show us some love, whether it's on LinkedIn or in our inboxes. Thank you. It's a small and very active and involved community, this Cleantech world. Mike, you and I were just talking about that yesterday. And it's good to shout you guys out and talk about what you're working on and show a little love. We're all in this together. If you got stories that you want on the show or people you want to talk about, email us. You can find me at paul.gerke@clarionevents.com. We do got some big clean tech stories to get into. Mike, what's the first one we're talking about?
Drum roll. Our first story is by our very own Paul Gerke. Titled, States Are Not Powerless Against Federal Clean Energy Pushback. It's community solar's time to shine. It would not be accurate, Paul, to say that the head of Clarion Events called me up and ordered me to put this story as our number one. It would be wrong.
It would be wrong to say that, and I'm glad you called me John Engel for the first time in a few weeks. It feels like a familiar hug to be misidentified as my esteemed colleague. And I just got to say, this is the first time that I've forced you guys to drink our own Kool-Aid on this show. I do appreciate you adding a little bit of my journalism into it, though, and I'd love to talk a little bit about the story, because this harkens back to the conversation that I just mentioned that you and I had yesterday about the clean tech industry, Mike. It's a small group of people. And it's a small group of people that all have like-minded goals, even if they don't necessarily try to get there by the same means and ends. So one problem that's affecting all of those people right now is electricity demand. Demand is going up, and we need to figure out how to get more electrons onto the grid as cost-effectively and as efficiently and quickly as possible. And one of the things that's really emerging as an option in a lot of places that maybe had been overlooked in some conversations as recently as a few years ago is community solar. And when we're talking about community solar, how it's being shared and where it's being set up really is as important as the scale. We're talking like half megawatt up to maybe 15 or 20 megawatts. These can be everywhere from industrial buildings to rooftops. It allows people to access the benefits of renewable energy without necessarily being able to put solar on the rooftops, if this is a concept that's relatively new to you. But the basis of it is that we need capacity, and there's capacity everywhere. Everywhere you look, Mike. I think I started the piece with a line like, there are cathedrals everywhere for those with the eyes to see, and there's capacity too. And new analysis shows that we can find like $120 billion in economic activity plus tens of thousands of jobs just by embracing community solar policies. Right now, 20 states have active ones, and it's really catching fire in the Midwest and some other states right now. And it's sort of emerging as one of those things that, there can be bipartisan support for, something we can get behind. These make a real difference in the communities they're in, Mike. What did you think? Did you have a chance to read this?
I did. I think, first off, in all seriousness, great piece. Thanks, man. Really important. I think you guys are doing some good journalism there. So a new piece of legislation in Minnesota may shut down its long-running community solar garden program by 2028. It has been providing affordable local solar options since 2013. So, enterprising State Senator Nick Friends thinks the program isn't economically viable. But as your piece points out, Paul, studies show that community solar actually reduces energy bills. Not that Senator Friends would ever listen to me, but I challenge him here to point to his past efforts of rooting out uneconomical ways the state of Minnesota provides corporate welfare to fossil fuels. Surely a man of his intellectual honesty and consistency would have done that. No? Paul, story number 2.
I love that you use that as a diving board. My story is a diving board. I appreciate that, Mike. Story number 2. Our second story, Kate Abnett at Reuters. It's called Key EU Lawmaker Says 90% Emissions Cut Too Ambitious for 2040 Climate Goal. Say it ain't so, Mike.
So ideology over reality is now a global virus, and this story proves it. So Peter Leese is a senior U.S. lawmaker in the influential European People's Party, the biggest party in the European Parliament. He said that the EU's goal of cutting carbon pollution by 90% by 2040 is overly ambitious and could trigger deindustrialization. This is a favorite talking point of the can't-do crowd. The European Commission is considering softening the target to address concerns about the cost for businesses and to gain support from skeptical governments and lawmakers. The EPP, which holds...
You down with EPP? Yeah, you know me.
Which holds a significant number of seats in the European Parliament, will play a role in shaping and approving the final 2040 climate goal. Paul, your thoughts?
Sorry, I couldn't resist the cheese there. Well, with EU industries feeling the squeeze from the cheap imports and U.S. tariffs, there's a proposal to keep that 90% target, but easing the load on domestic industries by using reliable international carbon credits, a compromise that the Commission is now exploring. I think that it just sort of from the 1,000-foot view, Mike, saying that our climate goals are too ambitious is kind of a sour taste in the mouths of a lot of folks. Even if it's a stark reality that we sort of have to grapple with, I just hope that we don't lose sight of these goals in their entirety. And that's pretty much all I've got to say about that. Story number 3, Mike.
Josh Siegel, Catherine Morehouse, and Alex Gillen from Politico. Trump's new goal, revive a major climate pollutant that power markets have turned against. Paul?
So if you're not following this because it changes every day, I don't really blame you. So we'll try to get you up to speed on what happened this past week. So on Tuesday, there were a bunch of executive orders signed. 4 of them were aimed at reviving the U.S. coal industry. They used the word data centers and AI in the executive order as like an explicit reason for why we need coal. The Trump administration wants to, flex its metaphorical muscle to open up public lands for coal leasing. They've got Interior Secretary Doug Burgum trying to reclassify coal as a mineral to fast track permitting. The DOE Loan Program Office, LPO, is going to offer $200 billion for energy infrastructure, including coal, through a program initially created under the IRA. The problem here, Mike, though, is that coal doesn't make a lot of sense in many of these contexts, especially when natural gas is more readily available. Like, there's no reason to go backwards on this at all. Like, it just doesn't make financial sense to anyone. Like, the people that are doing these jobs are looking at this and being like, cool, thanks, why? Mike, was that your takeaway too?
I think that's spoken like somebody who's not a coal industry lobbyist, Paul Gerke.
Guess not. Sorry. I'm sorry.
Right. So energy experts, utilities, and even some Republicans who support coal say this move probably won't turn things around for the industry. No matter how many executive orders he signs or how many hard hats he parades around, the cold reality is that coal is outdated, expensive, and getting outcompeted by cleaner, cheaper energy. But I want to add something. Diatribe alert, Paul.
Okay.
I just read that EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin talked about putting a spike into the religion of climate change.
I read that,
So, look, and this is kind of in line with this whole, it's very much in vogue these days. People who pronounce themselves as climate realists, who boldly assert that we still need oil and gas. So while I know that they're all auditioning for the next season of Captain Obvious, it's funny how these so-called realists aren't very realistic. See, these folks don't know more about the climatology than the climatologists. And the climatologists are really firm and united, and they're saying, this is getting really bad, and we don't have planet B. So bloviating that this reality somehow isn't a reality doesn't make you a realist. It makes you a foolish ideologue who hasn't found his planet B yet. So, Administrator Zeldin, I think you're the ideological zealot, and it would be really good if we all got back to reality and dealt with the fact we have a very challenging transition we need to execute. The need for it is just not in question. Paul, our fourth story.
Story number 4, Daniel Moore at Axios. DOE proposes shutting down Clean Energy Office. Mike, don't do it.
Friend, I got to tell you, I pine for the days when we were actually talking about market developments instead of
new cool stuff.
Instead of just the
Chicken Littling, where sky is falling every day. There's a new part of the sky falling on our heads, clunking you right in the melon.
The fecal matter show, which tends to be federal policy these days. Okay,
Yeah.
so the Energy Department plans to carry out Doge cuts to the Office of Clean Energy demonstrations.
Are we done with those kids yet? Didn't we send those 22-year-olds back up to their respective universities?
Not yet, friend. So they're created by the infrastructure law. This helps fund hydrogen, carbon capture, industrial decarbonization, advanced nuclear, and all that good stuff. The DOE is considering keeping about $10 billion in projects and moving them to other departments and canceling or rescoping up to $9 billion with a project. So here's a one question pop quiz.
Yeah.
Will these same budget cutters leave alone the DOE's fossil fuels office? Because after 250 years, isn't it time fossil fuels stood on their own 2 feet? Paul Gerke, what do you think?
Yeah, I think you can get the same answer to the question if you were to ask, well, do you think that SpaceX is going to stop getting government contracts, or do you think it'll just be everybody else? Anyway, it sounds like, the other thing, Mike, not to harken back to what you just said, not only is it the fecal matter show day in and day out, I can also hear axes grinding in the background just constantly. You and I, the axes are just getting sharper and sharper, and it's frustrating. And I would just rather be happy and jokey and sad. Last point on that, the DOE is reviewing every corner of every department, supposedly plans to cut thousands of so-called non-essential positions. I've got some friends that work over at DOE. They're worried. They're saddened that a lot of their efforts are going to not. They're watching people that they respect and peers that have been a part of integral operations within the DOE and our renewable energy future just sort of being cast aside and told that what they're doing is not important. And that sucks. Story number 5.
Yep, and because it makes great sense to just trade away your leadership in the energy technologies of today and tomorrow to your biggest competitors. But let's look past that. Our last story is written by Akshat Rathi from Bloomberg. He's back because he came on and talked about his really intriguing book, Climate Capitalism. But he's got a new piece, Clean Energy Already Has Big Trade Barriers. Now Comes Trump. Akshat, you are just a contributor to our good news here this week. Welcome back to the show. And thanks for coming on, seriously. If people haven't read this, I think, very solid piece, could you tell us what the big takeaway is?
Well, the news changes from day to day, as you all have been discussing. So I wanted to take a little step back and see whether trade barriers as a thing that affects all industries, if you put them on all industries, has been affecting clean energy already. And the answer is yes, and in actually a big way. Because if you just count the total number of trade restrictions, and this is not just tariffs, but non-tariff barriers, there are outright bans in some countries. They've been growing over the past 10 years for solar, for wind, for batteries, for electric cars. And to some extent, that makes sense, right? Now, take a global point of view over here. Trade wars have been happening for a long time. If anything, tariffs from an economist perspective, probably the only reason they would allow you to use it is if you're a developing country that needs to have a certain type of industry at home. We have seen countries after countries use it well for specific purposes. So a very good story that's told in economic history is of Hyundai. Hyundai used to be a steel company before the South Korean government thought we should have our own auto industry. And so they asked Hyundai to start making cars. And the first thing they did was just import a bunch of cars from Ford in the US, parts, and then assemble them in South Korea. And they're like, no, that's not good enough. And so Hyundai turned around and said, well, we cannot compete with what are, at that time, great American manufacturers. And so South Korea slowly increased its tariff to a point where it banned any imports of cars. And that allowed Hyundai to become a car company. And of course, now it's a global car company. It competes with many American brands. So there are places where you can use tariff barriers for your advantage. And that's happening in in energy industry for the past 10 years in a growth curve where countries are seeing an opportunity that having a domestic industry could actually make a lot of sense. Now, coming to today, well, that's exactly what the IRA was supposed to do. It was supposed to have some trade barriers. There are already a lot of trade barriers for solar imports, for example, or electric car coming from China into the US. But the only way to build the industry is to actually also support domestic manufacturing to make that happen. And right now, that's not what is happening. So to me, it was useful to just look in history, because when you're dealing with chaos and people questioning whether gravity exists or not, it helps to go back to basics.
Akshat, I like the way you put that, questioning whether gravity still exists or not. I find myself asking that question more often than I would like to admit.
I would say it was proven this week that it does exist, because a Trump U-turn, because bond yields were going very high, showed that economic theory exists for a good reason.
I just wish that I got the text that said now is a good time to buy. I missed it because I was doing my job as a good American that I am, and then the stock market went up 8,000 points, and I didn't get the piece of it. Anyway, Akshat, I wanted to ask you one more thing. In your reporting, and this is something I seem to bump into a little bit in mine. There is this line somewhere, and it depends on which industry you work in, where exactly that line is situated. But there's a line where it's like, why do we want to make this in the United States anyway? Like, we shouldn't do that. It would take way too much R&D, way too much time. Nobody has $2 billion to put into a glass kiln to make solar glass here in the US and run it 24/7. Like, in your reporting, where does that line exist? And is there a disconnect between the administration and the people actually on the ground doing the manufacturing and investing in these sort of things?
Well, again, if you just take it from a trade perspective, yes, you're right. China has won the solar game. It makes the cheapest, most efficient solar panels in the world, and you should just let China do it. And if China is happily, willingly trading with you, then you should just take those solar panels and make the energy. And the energy is not something you can export very easily. You can, if you would really like to, turn it into products. But this is where the political reality of trade is something that we just have to grapple with. Like, what is happening today isn't just driven by Trump. It's driven by years and years of trade policy actually having real impact on people in America, but also around the world, right? People have lost jobs as a result of deindustrialization in their parts. And the job of a government is to try and help those people. Now, you can do it in the right way, or you can do it in the wrong way. I think the right way here is to still look at industries where there is a potential to actually build out expertise. You could still do that in electric cars. You could still do that even in battery making. You could still do it in wind, in offshore wind, in hydrogen electrolyzers. There's a whole swath of clean energy technologies still to play for. Solar, probably not the best idea, but everything else is still to play for. And so you could be very smart about how you use tariffs and subsidies to create those industries, not just from a jobs perspective, but also from a national security perspective, right? Like, if you're going to be having all these wars, you want to have the military that is able to provide the most advanced technologies, which are these days powered by batteries and powered by solar panels, because then you don't have to carry your gasoline around in big tanks around the world. You want those at home because you want the capacity if China turns off those exports. So I understand it from a national security perspective. It's not the most economically sensible policy to pursue, but right now what is happening is not economic sensibility. So let's leave it there.
Paul, I know we're going a little bit long, but we don't get Akshat very often.
No, go ahead, fire away.
Akshat, I want to maybe close with this question. This will put you on the spot a little bit, but if you just seeing this remarkably tumultuous time in international trade, in policy changes, and in the dynamicism of just the clean tech markets, 5 years from now, where does the clean energy transition sit 5 years from now, if you had to put money on it?
Well, fortunately, I don't have to put money on it, so I can say whatever, and that'll be fine, right? My job restricts me from putting money on it, so I'm totally fine with that. I will say, look, you have to look at the long trends, right? Again, the now sometimes is too tempting. There was a really nice mantra that I'm carrying with me this year, which came from Kim Stanley Robinson, the sci-fi author, and who wrote this extraordinary book about how to solve climate change in the 21st century as a sci-fi novel. The Ministry for the Future. You should read it if you haven't. He said, "Don't focus on the soap opera. Don't focus on the personalities. Don't focus on the bickering that's going to happen or the spin that is going to be thrown at you. focus on the real economy, focus on real lives, focus on what people are doing. And I think that is where we should think about the long arch, right? Clean energy investments have gone up from the first term under Trump at about $400 billion annually to $2.1 trillion last year before Trump. Now, are you going to go back to 400 billion? 400 billion is still a lot of money, right? So clean tech industry isn't going away, first of all. Second, gravity is real. The physics of solar is real. The physics of climate change is real. Those factors don't go away because one country, and even if it's the world's largest economy, decides to completely think about ignoring the reality, as Paul was saying. Those realities matter to the rest of the world. Those realities matter to investors who know how to make money off this stuff. And investors, as we learned this week, still have some sway with the White House. And so if people see an opportunity to make money while doing good, while making this planet more habitable, I don't think the clean tech industry dies. Now, what happens in 5 years, we can be certain that this is going to have a negative impact, the sorts of policies that are coming out of the White House. So the growth trajectory that clean tech industry was on may not be the same growth trajectory, but does it reverse and go back to the ground? I don't think so.
Wise words from someone who's one of the best observers, I think, of the space. We got to go to our Cleantecher of the week, Paul.
Yes, we do. Akshat, thank you so much for your time. This week's Cleantecher of the Week, Charles Bolden. He leads up SEIA's energy and carbon portfolio. Previously helped lead an Energy and Commerce Committee roundtable on diversity within the energy industry. Also played an important role in industry lobbying days on Capitol Hill. If you knew him from way back when, give him a shout. Congrats, Charles, our Cleantecher of the Week.
He and I are going to be co-panelists on a National Grid CEO Summit coming up
later
this month. So yeah, it's really it's good. Very, very smart guy. Well, I want to thank our wonderful producer Brian Mendez and Alex Peterson and Claire Quirin for helping gather these stories.
Well, how did you get on that panel then? I guess it's a question we'll have to answer next week. Special thanks to Akshat Rathi for joining us this week on This Week in Clean Tech. Subscribe, give us feedback, leave a joke for Mike Casey, puts a smile on our faces. I'm glad we ended the show with a silver lining there. You'll find all the articles we discussed this week in the post you're watching this in. If you're watching the video, if you're just reading the podcast, or listening to the podcast rather, if there's a video component, go to Factor This to check it out.
And thank you. We'll see you next week.